Here to discuss his tenure is Julie Kelly. She is the author of the Declassified by Julie Kelly Substack and the book January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, good to have you back with us.
Vince, thanks so much for having me on.
Matthew Graves is headed to the exits, and I don't know what he has to show for it. What did he do that made him deserving of even a press release?
You know, it's not hyperbole, Vince, for you to describe him as one of the worst U.S. attorneys in DOJ history. Not only did he weaponize his office, divert needed resources to continue to round up Americans who walked in a government building on a Wednesday afternoon, their right, by the way, overcharging them, throwing them in jail on excessive sentences, tormenting these people. He ignored, as you know, the violent crime crisis happening in the nation's capital. The Washington Post reported a few years ago, he has one of the highest, what they call declination rates in the country, declining to charge almost 68% of the cases brought to him by local police in Washington, because he has been doing nothing more than Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco's dirty work. And that is rounding up these Trump supporters, mostly on low-level charges, which, Vince, was the funniest part about Matthew Graves' press release. He makes it sound like he rounded up 1,600 people on, assault or murdering police or destroying the Capitol, setting it on fire. The overwhelming majority have misdemeanor trespassing counts. So now it is going to be Matthew Graves' turn on the other side of the courtroom.
I hope you're right. I hope that's the case. Let me dwell for a moment on one of the January 6th defendants whose story ended very badly. Matthew Perna committed suicide in custody. As I understand it, and you can give us more clarity on this, they went after him. The video footage demonstrates that he was merely walking inside the Capitol building wearing a Make America Great Again sweatshirt, and he didn't. I didn't see him really even doing anything physical other than literally walking, and that they decided to not only charge him but to hit him with a terrorism enhancement, and apparently that destroyed him so much that he took his own life. What do we need to know about Matthew Perna?
So Matthew Perna is one of 3 J6 defendants who killed themselves on Matthew Graves' watch. And because you've had me on your show so many times, Vincent, thank you. Your listeners understand what this DOJ has put J6ers through. Matthew Perna, a college graduate, traveled around the world, was a Bernie Sanders supporter, then became a Trump supporter. He was charged with the 1512C2 obstruction count, as you said, nonviolent, and the 4 common misdemeanors. But nonetheless, after Matthew Graves became D.C. U.S. Attorney in November of 2021, he was appointed by Joe Biden. He accelerated the cases and the charges against J6ers and sought excessive prison time. So what Matthew Perna pleaded guilty, his lawyer told him, you might get a few months in jail, let's just get this over with. Matthew Graves' office came back to Matthew Perna and his attorney and said, no, we're going to seek enhancements to the regular sentences that we've been imposing for this obstruction count, and you're going to spend years in prison. With that, Matthew Perna hanged himself in his garage in February of 2022. A few months later, another man charged of the same low-level offenses, Mark Ongst, also killed himself. And last year, a young man, 20 years old, who had been charged by Matthew Graves, shot himself in the head, was found by his father because this young man did not want to put himself and his family through what Matthew Graves and his line prosecutors and this Biden DOJ has done to Trump supporters in this vengeful, reckless, abusive political prosecution of Trump supporters.
And everything that you just described is not a typical thing in any way. So, in other words, like all of the people who were wrecking the country in 2020, all of the left-wing violent rioters, the ones who murdered people in the streets of America, the ones who burned down businesses, burned down police precincts, and sowed destruction during that awful summer of 2020. We haven't seen anything like this. In fact, the United States Department of Justice outright says that the single largest investigation and prosecutions they've ever undertaken involve January 6, 2021. So, I mean, everything you're describing, there's nothing about it that's typical, is there?
There absolutely isn't. And furthermore, Matthew Graves lied in that press release, shockingly, right? There's no evidence to support that this is the single largest assault on law enforcement in a single day. We saw what happened throughout the country, especially in Washington, D.C., for several days. BLM and Antifa protesters assaulting federal police, including Secret Service, as they were preventing those rioters from trying to enter the White House. It was so bad they had to lock down the White House, as we all recall. So Matthew Graves lies. Furthermore, Vince, this has to be said. Most of the police officers who were injured, and we have no record documenting the 142 law enforcement. A lot of those officers were injured by friendly fire because they were gassing protesters standing on Capitol grounds, and the gas was kicking back and hitting officers. Most of those injuries were self-inflicted, so-called friendly fire between D.C. Metro and Capitol Police. So Matthew Graves, again, lying to justify, yes, the biggest criminal prosecution investigation in DOJ history against Trump supporters, and there he is bragging and lying in that press release.
Yeah, it is a lie. And by the way, I was reminded of another event where left-wing rioters were specifically hurting cops, and that was the attack in 2020 on that courthouse in Portland. It was a federal courthouse that was under siege night after night. In addition to throwing Molotov cocktails and human waste at police officers, there were laser pointers pointed into the eyes of the law enforcement officials who were trying to guard the courthouse, to the tune of 113 of the officers suffered eye injuries from lasers being pointed directly into their eyes. I don't see Matthew Graves bringing that context up as he decides to be hysterical in this closing press release of his tenure.
Right, and the whole thought that he's defending democracy, no, you have destroyed it. And because what people like Matthew Graves did, now resulting, Vince, in the lowest trust, public trust in this Department of Justice in history, they have brought the DOJ's public trust factor into almost single digits, especially among Republicans. So he didn't defend democracy. He helped destroy it. And partially, I think you can attribute Donald Trump's win because of the lawfare that has been inflicted on innocent Americans by Matthew Graves and Merrick Garland and others across, the other prosecutors whom we know they're not federal, but state prosecutors. This was a partial rejection. Imagine, too, just for a second, savor this. Through Matthew Graves, these federal judges, his line prosecutors, you have spent almost 4 years ruining the lives of 1,600 Americans. And what did you get at the end of the day? You got yourself fired for it because Donald Trump won, and you are being run out of the most powerful office. We will see what law firm he goes to. We will be watching, because where these prosecutors go, we are going to blacklist those law firms. We're going to blacklist any lawyers who defend them if they are investigated or brought up on charges themselves, because those are the rules that they have set over the past 4 years. And now it's time for them to suffer the same sort of consequences that they unleashed on others.
Well, that's exactly right. Now the obligation is for the rest of us to ravenously seek the disbarment and perhaps criminal prosecution of all of these people, because that's the tack that they take with the right. If you dare be an attorney for anybody, for President Trump himself or anybody who might support him, well, then you may be disbarred. You may be attacked by our institutions And here you have a guy like Matthew Graves who's pretending like he has some great record behind him. Meanwhile, as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, as you pointed out, it's a rare U.S. attorney that actually handles the prosecution of local crimes. That's true in the nation's capital. And he declined to pursue upwards of 68% of all arrests in the nation's capital. Additionally, murders reached a quarter-century high in D.C. under Matthew Graves' tenure. So this is not some record to be proud of. In fact, it is in every way an utter disgrace, and he should hang his head in shame, and yet they're throwing up these middle fingers as he heads out the door.
Let's admit, he did resign in shame because he lost, because Donald Trump won, and everything that he tried to do in creating this caseload, which he did, which caused, as I just wrote in my piece, uncalculable human damage and wreckage that he has left behind. But ultimately, this J6 prosecution is going to go down as a black mark in our nation's history, as a reason why people don't trust the DOJ and why Donald Trump got elected, and that hopefully, Vince, for the first time, federal prosecutors like Matthew Graves will face their own set of legal consequences. Because if that doesn't happen, history will repeat itself, and we cannot let this happen again.
Also, think about what this means in terms of just, the continuity of government and respecting the will of the voters, if you're going to do that at all. So as you point out, the voters just fired Biden and company, which includes Matthew Graves. But in so doing, they did it with full knowledge that Donald Trump was bringing pardons on day one for January 6 defendants. And yet his whiny little statement as he announces his resignation is that he's very proud of prosecuting all of the people who the American voter said should not have been subjected to this in the first place. And that reminds me of a conversation you and I had recently where in court filings, the Justice Department was still insisting that even if Trump pardons all of these January 6 defendants, that they should know that they're still guilty forever and that a pardon doesn't take away your guilt. It's so petty and so destructive.
It really is. And Matthew Graves has said this in recent court filings that, potential pardons have no place in their consideration in terms of going forward with jury trials or throwing people in jail or even bringing new charges. Vince, this office was announcing new arrests the week before Christmas. Even in light of the fact that this Capitol siege section of the DOJ will be shut down, that existing indictments will be dismissed, that pardons are forthcoming, he doesn't care. To him, because he's taking his marching orders from Joe Biden and from Merrick Garland, he is going to now run this out until his last moments in office on January 16th.
Yeah.
And then his little lackey, Bridget Fitzpatrick, will take that over for the last remaining days.
Yes.
But yes, they are to the very end defiant of not just the rule of law, the decency of this country, but certainly the results of the election.
Julie, I've got one more for you, which is over the weekend, the Washington Post reported that Joe Biden has two regrets, really. One of them is not staying in the race. In other words, listening to Nancy Pelosi and getting out. But two, and I think the one that people are not paying enough attention to, is he regrets picking Merrick Garland because he is angry that the Justice Department didn't drag Donald Trump into a courtroom sooner. In other words, he was hoping for more political damage to be done by the Justice Department. What do you make of that admission this week by the Washington Post?
It's just once again proof that Joe Biden's insistence that this DOJ was independent, that he was having no influence on Merrick Garland or then Jack Smith's decisions is just a lie. We've seen other reporting where he has expressed disappointment with Merrick Garland for not bringing charges quicker. And we have proof from covering the classified documents case, as you know, my reporting what was happening in southern Florida, proof of collusion between the DOJ, the Biden White House, and the National Archives to concoct a documents case against Donald Trump. Look, Merrick Garland did as much as he possibly could to get Donald Trump to trial in both Washington and southern Florida. He personally signed off on the armed raid of Mar-a-Lago in August of 2022. But look, there just wasn't evidence there. I mean, that was the problem that Merrick Garland and the DOJ had. The classified documents case was a sham, and the J6 4-count indictment was also a sham. I mean, they really struggled, even with all of the benefits and opportunities that they had to create some sort of case. They struggled to do so because there's just nothing there in either one. So that is Joe Biden's frustration, not just because Merrick Garland didn't do something sooner, but because there was just no crime there.
Well, Julie Kelly, I'm always so grateful for you to join us. We wouldn't know enough to take the victory lap we're taking today were it not for you. So thank you for that. Great to get rid of Matthew Graves, and great to have you on the show today, as always.